Welcome to OmniAthlete. You believe that you can be more, and so do we. We created this show and company to do it with you by empowering your performance with the wisdom and techniques of the world's highest achieving mind, body, and spirit competitors. Okay, so today's guest is a former NFL safety turned social entrepreneur committed to awakening the capacities of developing communities around the world. His path as an athlete actually started when he began training in gymnastics at age 6. It wasn't until he got older that organized team sports entered the picture, and his commitment to seeing just how far he could go in football solidified when he was recruited to play college football his junior year of high school. After a standout career at UCLA, he was drafted by the Green Bay Packers in 2002 and played 5 years in the NFL. Because he never solely identified as an athlete, he left football by choice and actually turned down a contract offer in order to travel Europe, explore what life was asking of him next, and learn from his Dutch aviation mentor. His journey and learning led him to launch the World Education Foundation, which bridges the gap between academic and expert knowledge and their implementation in local communities around the world. To date, the WE Foundation has served communities in over 18 countries and taken on ambitious projects like developing a sustainable and localized malaria treatment ecosystem, introducing American football to developing countries, and leveraging biodiesel to pull thousands of farmers out of poverty in the DR Congo. He holds a degree in American literature and culture from UCLA, a master's in adult learning and global change from Linköpings University in Sweden, and was a winner of the 2017 Singularity U Norway Global Impact Challenge for his work on SignLab AI. It's my pleasure to introduce to OmniAthlete, Marques Anderson. Welcome to the show, Marques.
Happy to be here. How you doing, Josh?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's an energizing 2019.
It really is. What a way to start it out.
So one of the places I want to start, as I was doing the research for your episode, this idea of ancient wisdoms kept recurring. I've heard you talk about it a lot. I've heard it connected to travel, to different communities. And I'd love to start there and connect that maybe a little bit to where it's shown up for you and also how that can map to sport and life.
For sure. So ancient wisdom is, basically acknowledging all of the things that have come before. There's been a plethora of people that have done things under the sun. And one little caveat before we get started, the sun is the closest to the earth as it will be ever in 2019 today. So, but ancient wisdom, I really kind of got involved with that when I started internationally travel. My first international travel was when I was a junior at UCLA, and it was in Lagos, Nigeria. And when I got off the plane, it was just this familiarity that was in the air. It was one of the largest sunsets that I had ever seen. And there was something that was very familiar on the ground. But as I started talking to the locals, I started to pick up on certain things that they had integrated into their society, into their social fabric, that ultimately kept them together no matter what their social economic status was. And this sustainability has led them through millenniums as well as, centuries of evolution, of community building, and tapping into that ancient wisdom. Whether you talk to someone that's over 65 or 70, even though we have this plethora of technology, they still have wisdom that you can tap into. So when we talk about this ancient wisdom, we're talking about it in the constraints of the world. The world is billions and billions of years old. But how do we tap into all of those different types of aspects of development and evolution where we can start to make change? And I think that grounds us into a place where we're not separated from anything that has come from the past, and we're not separated from anything that's going to come into the future. So as an athlete, if we can condense that ancient wisdom of the people that have come to before us, this is why we watch film. This is why we watch, superstars. This is why we grow up emulating people, because they have done things that we haven't done quite yet. And if you can look at that and go in and dive deep into that ancient wisdom and take bits and pieces from whether it be a community or an athlete that you are inspired to be like, then you can start to make an impact on your own life.
So it's interesting because as you were sharing that, I don't know that I had ever really thought of wisdom in the same capacity as that knowledge and experience we gain from watching film, from watching players that come before us. That's energizing, because if we think of that as a translation of wisdom, right, which is exactly what it is, it's, there's there's a neurological correlate, there's a spiritual correlate. We're experiencing that wisdom. It allows us, if we choose to as athletes, to kind of tap into a spiritual dimension of something that otherwise would be as simple as just watching film.
Definitely. A lot of my biggest plays actually came from just being in a moment where I just was able to react. And that reaction came from me being able to align myself with the preparation of watching film, seeing those small, intricate details of what a receiver might do, or a quarterback, or an alignment of a certain type of play. And looking at things that have come before has really helped me to, make plays not only on the field, but now in my new career.
What does that word wisdom mean to you?
Wisdom is experience actually activated. So, when you're able to experience something and have an experience and go through that, you can translate that and turn that into wisdom, because it is something of a reference. It's almost like having a tool shed where while we go through life, we gain tools and we put those tools in our tool shed, and we might not need them right then and right there. But at some point, we might be able to go into that tool shed, pull that tool out, and start to utilize that. And I kind of, put that as synonymous to wisdom, as we have this plethora of tools that we can tap into when we need it.
So one of the really interesting aspects of your development as an athlete that I've heard you talk about before is that it was never really sports or academics, right? It was always this both and. It was never an either or. Where did that come from for you, and how did that show up, especially as a younger athlete, right? So high school and college, what was that dynamic like as you tried to really balance and honor both in an equal and honest way?
For sure. I think it's the causal effect from lineage. My parents actually went to U of O, and my dad was a football player, and it was kind of cliche. My mom was a cheerleader, so they met at the University of Oregon. But they always stuck into me and my sisters the fact that academics was something that defined you for the rest of your life, and talent and athletics is something that you can create windows for the future. So, I think through that lineage and watching my sister, and particularly my older sister, the way that she approached academics was very straightforward. I was more of a person that would be outside, breaking things down, putting them back together. And my sister was kind of the stickler for just, book knowledge, getting in there, understanding something frontward or backwards, and activating from that aspect. But she was also a star athlete. She actually ran track. She won a gold medal in the 2000 Olympics in track. So, when we talk about wisdom and looking at people before, I had someone that was very close to me that I could use as a template to understand the importance of not only academic success, but also athletic success.
So it sounds like there was this balance for you between tinkering and then just, I don't know if it's going by the book, if that's the right phrase, but kind of walking that line. Did you have to learn how to honor both? Were you more kind of a natural tinkerer that would want to be out in front, just playing with it as you went?
Well, I was a little bit different when I was growing up, in my eyes, and I didn't really understand that until I became older. But when I was young, I used to actually meditate before I even knew what meditation was. I would put on this rhythmic music or whatever type of tune that I could actually get a groove to, and I would bounce my head on a pillow. And that pillow, would actually put me into almost a beta state, where I would, see in shapes and sounds and colors. And, the hardest and the most difficult thing for me was being able to translate what I saw in whatever dimension that was into this three-dimensional space. So a lot of people thought that I thought different, that I saw the world differently. And I used to use that as looking at it as, is this a good thing? Is this a crutch? Is this something? But as I got older and I was able to articulate myself a little bit more, I saw that, seeing things differently and pushing edges and being a visionary is okay. And I think I started to harness that. And the more that I started to harness that, the more doors started opening for me, where I wasn't really curtailing my life to what somebody else thought that I should be doing or be defined as, but being okay with looking at new boundaries and crossing those boundaries in a safe and profound way.
Did that show up for you in football?
It did. It did. I had a couple of buddies in during my stint in the league, and even at UCLA, a lot of people thought that I actually thought different. I had somebody on my leave me a note not too long ago from one of my Pop Warner teams that basically said, "Oh man, like I didn't know that you were actually, looking at the world different. Like we would used to like make fun and clown and look at you differently, but um, that's just how I saw the world, and I couldn't kind of rewire myself to see the world any other way because I just thought that's how it was. And what I always thought was, if there's a solution to something, with hard work, dedication, and applied wisdom and knowledge, you could figure it out. And that's from grand challenges all the way to, beating a team, or being the best performer that you could possibly be. So, utilizing that kind of supernatural power of envisioning this macro understanding of the world, but condensing that into the everyday reactionary type of behavior that sports demands, it really helped me out in a lot of different ways where I was almost having out of body experiences while I was on the field.
I was just going to ask, so the natural extension there, right, is okay, you're experiencing these other dimensions of just being a human being, right? And you're doing this while also having to react in one of the most condensed action environments in sport, right? So what were there techniques that you developed or just maybe processes as you went in your career that allowed you to say, okay, I've done the work, I've done the prep, now I'm just going to be here now?
What really saved me, or what really started to condense a lot of the knowledge that I really didn't understand, was meditation. And meditation with the active breathing technique was something that I really called upon in order to actually figure things out. Being able to, slow down the mental processes and really start to use that breath to go from your sacral type of chakras all the way up to your crown chakra and activating that pipe, that tube of light that can actually open up new beginnings and new ways to look at certain things. And transferring, energy to matter was really something that I really focused on. So looking at it from the atomic level all the way to the body level, where you pass through the molecular and the chemical and the cell tissues and the heart and the vascular systems, to where you can take a vision, or you can take that meditation and really start to turn that into actionable steps, was something that I really learned and started to hone in when I started to become, really conscious about how effective it could be.
Can you pinpoint when you started to pull that thread in a really conscious way? So it wasn't, when the evolution for you as an athlete specifically, and then I think there's a bigger question here of as a human being, how we develop, right? But as an athlete, when did you start to say, oh, this is helping me? If I pull this thread, it might be weird. It might be different than most of what my teammates or community sees, but this is helping me perform better. When did you start to pull that thread?
That actually happened in high school.
Right.
And I remember it quite vividly because I remember the coach came up to me at one track meeting and said, "Hey, Marcus, you're running the 400. And at that time, I had never ran a 400 before. And I thought that was the most brutal race that I could actually imagine, because it's right in the middle between a long distance race and a sprint,
Yep.
And there's no letting up, there's no stopping, and you have to get all the way around the track. So I was really trying to find ways that I could harness, the importance of performing, but also not trying to go out there and kill myself, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
But, being able to slow everything down, to meditate over, how am I going to approach this? What are the preparations that I need to actually put into action in order to perform well? I started to basically slow everything down and not be so anxious, not move from a space of fear or intimidation, but to really say, okay, this is something that I'm going to do. I'm going to try to do it my best. What are the tools that I need in order to perform at my peak? And I really started to breathe. I started to concentrate on my action steps, on how I would approach it. And then when I actually got out there and I ran it, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And then actually I fell in love with it. And through that, it was a challenge that was met, but it was also preparation and steps that I took by slowing everything down, visualizing my steps, and then actually executing in a way that I thought was best for me at that time.
So as you went through your career, what did you do with the tensions that emerged between you and, say, a coach who might have had different philosophy or perspective? And I think there is, for a lot of us as athletes, this tension that emerges when we see the world different than the people we're looking to, whether it's teammates, coaches, agents, managers, could be anybody, right? When we have that dissonance at times, navigating that and remaining whole in the process can be really challenging. What did you do, and what were those tensions like?
Yeah, those tensions were real, and I think that was ultimately one of the reasons why I decided to step away from the NFL. But as a general manager or as a coach, they look at you and they define you as a football player. There's very few coaches, and I'm not saying that they're far and few between, but there's very few coaches that really care about the total dynamics of each player. It'd be almost impossible to do that. But ultimately, I was more than a football player. I was somebody that looked at the world and thought that, hey, if I was excited about it, or if I thought there was a challenge there that would push me forward, I wanted to be involved in that. So just being defined as a football player was really a challenge for me, because I saw myself as something different than, say, a coach or a general manager did. So it did create tension. I remember when I was in Green Bay, I started to me and another teammate of mine, Javon Walker, we started a book tour, around Wisconsin. We also started a clothing line. And I think, in hindsight, that caused a lot of tension, because it wasn't something that they, signed off on, or it wasn't something that they said, hey, Marques and Javon, this is what I want you guys to be doing. So it wasn't kind of under the umbrella of what their definition for me was. But pursuing those things, or even writing a children's book, I remember the general manager for the Raiders, came up to me and said, Marques, you can play in this league as long as you want, but you got to stop doing all those other things off the field. And for me, that's when, the passion for the game that I grew to love, actually, I could physiologically feel it leave my body, and it wasn't the fact that I stopped loving the game, but it was more of that I couldn't be owned by the game. That there were other things that I wanted to pursue. There were other definitions that I wanted to solidify in my life that were beyond just athletics. But I did use a lot of that fuel from being different and those tensions to prove people wrong and say, you know what, this is how you define me, but I'm going to prove, that I can be much more than what you see me currently as.
What makes it so challenging in that professional environment to be able to hold and honor the whole person, when we know that truly is the path to peak performance, right? We can't slice ourselves and hope to be, if we don't show up whole, we're not going to perform at our best. So why is it so difficult for a coach or a GM to hold a greater, without overusing this word, wholeness and truly the multidimensional nature of each player?
Well, I think when you get to a certain point where there's money involved, you become a commodity, and not too many people, would actually have unconditional love for a commodity, and unless it's water or air. And I don't know if air is a commodity yet, but it may be soon. But, when you grow up, you have people around you, like your friends, your family, the people that really support you. They love you unconditionally. If you have a great game, they're going to cheer you on. If you have a bad game, they're going to give you support. In the league, it's not like that. When you're performing, everybody's job is on the line, so they look at you as a means to an end, and if you don't perform, then that is a reflection on everybody else. And when there's money involved, it goes wider, because you have family structures, you have bills to pay, you have all these different things where love may not come directly into that equation. But unconditional love, that you get while you're coming up through the ranks, and that support that you get coming up through the ranks, it may start to diminish a little bit when you get money involved and become a professional athlete, which is okay, because everybody signs up for that. But I think that is the difference between, having people that really support you and you just being a commodity in a business.
Yeah. What was that relationship with love in college, and how did it transition? How was that different premier D1 program at UCLA. How did that show up for you there? And then how did it show up differently in the NFL?
Well, I think there's a much of a brotherhood, much
Yeah.
more of a brotherhood in college sports, because you play on with each other for 4 years. You become, a leader, or you become someone ingrained to where you're spending so much time with the people that are on your team. So you get to know their ins and outs. You get to know what they like, what they don't like. You create this bond. And then as you get older and you become a professional, that kind of collegial type of atmosphere is replaced. You have guys that are getting traded. The guy in your locker you might have, had become best friends with, and the next day, after training camp, they're gone. So being able to almost put up this wall to protect, not only your emotional state on the field, but also the people that are in close proximity to you, it's a different dynamic. But you have to kind of find that and manufacture that brotherhood, because that's where the team with the best chemistry is usually going to win over a team that has the most talent. And I found that a lot throughout my college years, is that when we were all clicking and we were doing things not only on the field but off the field together, and the people that were showing up for our off-season practices, those were the people that you knew you could count on. And that's where I think those bonds were mended.
So if we fast forward to the transition from playing, I'd love for you to share what that process was like, because it was such a conscious choice, right? It wasn't the situation that I think a lot of professional athletes find themselves in when it became no longer an option, but it was a conscious choice for you. So number one, what was that transition like? And number two, how did you allow love to guide the decisions you made from that point forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, after the Raiders, I actually got traded to the Denver Broncos. And I think that was in hindsight, that was one of the most, I guess, opportune situations that could have happened for me. While I was actually in a hotel playing pool, an older gentleman by the name of Derek Van Berkel came up to me and he was like, "Hey, would you want to have dinner with me and my buddies?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I think this gets back into that wisdom aspect. I always kind of hung around older people because they had stories to tell. But I sat down, they started telling me they were actually pilots, and one of them had been to 147 countries. And they were working on this project in the Centennial Private Airport, where they were converting this large passenger aircraft into a cargo aircraft. So they were doing all the stress tests and retrofitting the doors. And after work or after practice, I would go over there and I would be, intrigued on how they were able to take this huge machine and turn it into something that they actually wanted to, either sell or to utilize in a different way. And through this relationship, I became very conscious that there was other things outside of sports that, really fascinated me. And I think with this openness that Dirk had for me, I was able to make that transition and say, you know what? I love football, but it's not something that I want to do forever. But could I actually go down another road that would inspire love in me in a different way, where I could actually intellectually stimulate myself and find love in that? And I think that's what opened the door for me to actually explore outside of football, was that love that Dirk had for me, and actually opening up these new areas of exploration for me, but also the love that I started to have for myself and saying, you know what, I can define myself in a different way.
So there's different layers there, right? Where in that moment, it sounds like where a lot of us sometimes I think are challenged is that armor comes up especially if we have to build it to protect ourselves and the people around us. And then when we have these opportunities to glean wisdom, to connect with somebody who is willing and opening their heart to us, we have this challenge, right, of being able to say, I'm here, I'm going to step into this. Was that challenging for you, or were you at a point already where you had kind of said, I'm ready to open up, I just don't yet know where it's going to be?
Yeah, through my meditations, and as I got older, I started to basically be able to refine the things that I was finding in my meditations and activate those things. So I wasn't scared to open up to those things because I always wanted to follow my heart, you
Hmm.
know, and what I started to do in my meditations is that I would take specific questions within my meditations and I would ask those things and I would listen to my heart on a physiological basis
Wow.
and I would look at the heart rate movements, you know, the variables within my heart. So if I took a question in and my heart started beating fast, I knew it may be something that I shouldn't pursue at that moment or something that I should put on the shelf for later. But if I asked that same question and it was calm, then I knew it was something to pursue. So, you know, having that alignment and being able to tune that almost like a tuning fork, use your heart as your tuning fork to making big decisions, I started to become really affluent in doing that more and more often. So when it was time to actually make that transition, it wasn't a hard decision because I knew that my heart was in alignment with that decision.
Wow. So there's this notion of synchronicities that shows up, it sounds like in your life, and has shown up in multiple areas, right? From that moment to the moment in the, shared cab in Argentina, right? There's this really powerful energy that you have, that you've cultivated, and just that I'm going to be open to these synchronicities. They're there.
Mhm.
Where This is kind of an open question, but I think what is energizing for me, and what I know our audience would love to hear too, is what's allowed you to continue, maybe it's some of what you just said, to continue to see those synchronicities when they're emerging and take action from them, because a lot of times we see it but we don't do anything with it.
Right. And I think it is about synchronizing. I think it is about not being afraid, but then also being curious. You
Yeah.
know, I think curiosity would really push me in a lot of different ways and it helped me evolve in a lot of ways. And with being curious, you make a lot of mistakes, you know,
Mm.
because you don't have all the answers. But being curious opens up new doors to where you can look failure or take a mistake and look at it as a growing opportunity and find your path. You know, a lot of people say, like, oh, I don't know what I want to do. Hey, try 1,000 things, you know, until you can take bits and pieces of those 1,000 things and mold something or create something where your masterpiece is showcased. And I think when in life, you know, being able to understand that, you know, from an atomic level, we are part of everything, but
Mm.
also from a universal level, we are part of everything. And when we can start to channel that information and start to channel that energy to where we can bring it down to ourselves and our decisions, then that evolution allows us to understand that we don't have to be afraid of trying something new. We don't have to be afraid of being curious about something, where we can take um, a leap of faith, per se, and saying that if I actually just try and I take a step forward, that the universe will actually conspire to actually making something that I thought was impossible possible.
So we have to get to the We Foundation, but what comes screaming through right now for me is these words, Marcus, aren't just words. I can hear it in your voice. Like, this is knowing, right? There's this deep sense of knowing you have when you speak this way about, hey, we are all connected, whether it's atomic or universal. I have this sense that as athletes, we know this intuitively more than most people, but we have a hard time owning those words
Hmm.
with the knowing that is needed to really manifest that kind of experience. What have you done to make that knowing so unquestionable, right? So just deep to your cellular structure, so it's not just something you're trying to bolt on to old beliefs, old patterns.
Yeah, you know, and I think for me personally, it was slaying my ego.
Yeah.
You know, even looking at, you know, the ego can come from two different spectrums. It can come from inflection, you know, how you actually view yourself,
Hmm.
and your reflection, you know, and also how other people view you. So you can take bits and pieces like, okay, my mother thinks I'm this way, or my dad thinks I'm this way, or my coach thinks I'm this way, but I feel this way, you know. So having those two pressures of actually being able to define what that ego is and who you identify with can be a challenge. You know, we don't, some of us, it takes a journey, you know, a lifetime to understand who we really are. But what I did was very conscious about slaying the ego, and almost becoming a vessel, you know, for this atomic and universal spectrum. That sometimes I would be on one side of the spectrum, other times I would be on another side of the spectrum. You know, I remember when I was making a transition, I would think of things in a very macro level, very esoteric level, very universal level. And a lot of it was missing on a lot of practical things. But then as I started to go down that spectrum and ground myself, I saw that I can actually move things in this three-dimensional space from not just being esoteric, not just being flighty, not just being able to look at something in a grand vision, but also what are the action steps that we need to take right now in order to get to that esoteric universal. So sliding up and down that spectrum, I think really helped me out in understanding, where I was and where I needed to be at that time.
So tie that into where the We Foundation came from and some of the journey maybe that led you to say, this is where I really want to devote a lot of the creative vision and energy that I have right now.
Yeah, I think the We Foundation was spawned off, and actually I know the We Foundation was spawned off of this curiosity.
Yeah.
When I left the league, I traveled around Europe for 10 months. And I was introduced to a lot of people in the academic space, the new technology space, research and development. And I started to intellectually be stimulated in a way that I had never been stimulated before. So during this time, I really wanted to set a platform to where I was receiving knowledge. So it comes back to this kind of being a vessel where I was receiving knowledge, but I couldn't just hold on to that knowledge. I had to actually transfer that knowledge into something else. So this really inspired me to be able to articulate all of these things that I wanted to do in life, where it inspired me to go back and get a master's in adult learning and global change. How could I actually look at all of these different things of global, how to combine technology with information, with just assessments on how people learn, and utilize those tools into creating change in the world, like real change. Everybody can say, hey, well, I wish there was peace on the earth, but how are we going to get there? Hey, I wish wars would stop, but how are we going to get there? So what I did is took action steps to traveling and having conversations with real people, people that you wouldn't necessarily converse with on a day-to-day basis, not being afraid to step outside of your comfort zone and have a conversation and say hello and see what that person's stories are. In order to gain or glean some type of information from that can be transferred into another situation. So I think it gets back to really building those tools, traveling, being in places that you wouldn't think that you would be in. During my dissertation portion of my master's, I traveled throughout South America for 7 months, really with no agenda, but going down on the ground, meeting with people, going to birthdays, having dinners, having conversations about how people lived in different environments and in different situations. And I think that really inspired me to create the We Foundation on where could I actually use all of this knowledge that I'm gaining in order to actually make somebody else's life better.
What have been some of the universal patterns that you've seen around change? What environmental factors, what ecosystems support that kind of change and growth and what doesn't? And what have maybe been some of the surprising, whether it's been through a We Foundation project or just conversations you've had and seen, places or examples of change that really did surprise you or didn't match what you had kind of seen as that model for how you create it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it gets back to that ancient wisdom, and me and one of my best friends, colleagues, and spirit workers, Jen Lemon, she really helped me to develop the operating system for the We Foundation. And what we built that off of was this concept called edge learning, where we would go down to communities and we would see people actually that, may have not had all of the monetary or the infrastructural type of stability that, say, someone in the West may have. But what we did see is that they had a concept of understanding sustainability in a way that was very unique, but very, very practical. Communal togetherness was something that they depended on because, if the farmer didn't do their job, then the community doesn't eat. If someone, within that community has assignment to do something, then that would be something that is very prevalent to how communities actually function. And what we saw is that a lot of times, whether it be individual or communities, when they're pushed to their edges, that's when a lot of the real learning actually happens. And EDGE, we broke it down into an acronym where E actually stands for education, or deschooling, kind of shedding those old models or mindsets and systems that kind of inhibit discovery, for a new world. And then D actually stands for devotion, or this ecological learning, where learning from nature or creating this physiological resonance with ecology, like getting into nature or being in nature. You can take a lot from biomimicry on how nature actually solves challenges and see wisdom from there. And then the G stands for guidance. And that guidance is kind of this rational learning where you're reclaiming this indigenous wisdom and generating new systems, even on old patterns. And then this emergence is kind of this experiential learning where you're getting in, you're getting dirty, you're getting muddy with the people that you're actually supposed to be helping. So there's almost an experience of off the map travel or intense immersion where everybody is participatory into one common goal. So you can actually transfer that in from sports all the way to the communities that are on the ground, where if everybody's pushing for the same goal and you're all pushing to your edges, then that's when actual supernatural things can actually happen.
So that is an incredible model. And there's two questions that come up for you. Number one, what's that balance been like for you of education and deschooling, right? So you're somebody who's gone through quite a bit of higher education, right? And you have that background, but you've also said, I need to tinker, I need to learn, I need to be curious and explore, even if that's maybe different than what I've learned in school. So what has that balance been like for you of learning when to lean on one side or the other?
Yeah, it was a challenge, from the first years that I really started to be able to articulate where I wanted to go in life. It was a challenge. And finding that balance was quite difficult, and it's almost kind of like, hey, you're swinging to one side. All right, hey, I'm super academic, and then you're swinging to another side where I'm super curious. And, I'm more of a maverick in the way that I approach challenges. So finding that balance where you can glean off of academic knowledge where, hey, somebody has spent hours and hours just figuring out this one, minute situation, to where you're saying, hey, let's throw everything into the bucket. Let's see what we find. Let's dig our hands in and see what's there. And being curious about things, it is something that you kind of have to balance. And to be perfectly honest, it was a struggle for me, coming out of the NFL, because I had a direction, but I didn't know the details of what I wanted to do, and the direction was kind of the guidance and, the resonance of what was actually good for me, and what I thought was good for my journey. But then also being able to hone that down and say, hey, these steps need to be done where, just like in football, you have a game plan, you have studying, and then you execute. I had to basically refine that and say, I have to have a game plan in order to take all of these different visions and bring them down into action steps where I can start making a change.
So now, how does that EDGE model map into sport? And maybe specifically, because I know you've done quite a lot of work of bringing American football to underdeveloped countries, right? What does that process look like for you? And what's been the greatest bridge building capacity with sport?
Mm-hmm. So with sport, being pushed to your edges is something that happens every day with an athlete. When a lot of athletes, they get into these mantras, almost like, wow, I didn't even believe that I could do that myself, and you get into almost this flow state where you are prepared, your practice, your body is well oiled, you've put in the work, but still when you're out there on the field, you're almost going to these alpha brain waves where you're paying in such deep attention to what you're doing right then. Sometimes you get lost in the moment. If you really think about it, you have 90 to 100,000 people cheering for you, all making noise, but it's complete silence. when you're out there on the field. It's something to where, it's hard to explain, but it's almost like being in an ocean and being underwater, where you can feel and you can hear, the trembles of the weight around you, but being able to silence everything and to bring everything to where things start to move in slow motion. That's something that when you're pushed to your edges and you're actually opening up to deschooling or to learning the guidance of something that's outside of you, and I don't want to get too religious, but, looking at how God or the universe or this universal energy can actually utilize you as a person into doing magnificent things. I think that alignment is something that every athlete experiences, at least once or twice or plenty of times during their competitive years. So that really helped me in sports where, I was able to harness this mass amount of energy from either the crowd or my preparation or my experiences or the wisdom that I've accumulated over time, and hone that into, I want to make a play. I visualize it, I see it, and I'm going out here and I'm going to make it happen.
So the energy you were drawing on at times had very little to do with, I think, what we consciously perceive our energy comes from as athletes a lot of times, right? In this three-dimensional kind of Newtonian model where we think of the run faster, jump higher, the energy I have comes from my physical manifestation, right? Rather than something like the energy of the crowd, the energy of my preparation, the wisdom that I can draw on. Those, when you talk about them, what I hear is that those weren't etheric, abstract concepts, right? Those were tangible energies to you that you could draw on when you needed to. That's incredibly energizing because I think we all feel that, right? As athletes, we know that feeling. And at times we just need to give ourselves permission to say that's there for us to call on.
For sure, and it's okay to be great. I think sometimes within our egos, we're afraid to be great for the lack of making someone else feel better or not outshining someone or making a play and the attention being on you, and I think that's what I really had to get over was it's great to be, humble. But at sometimes, you don't want to jeopardize that for the lack of self-love, and the lack of sabotaging your own maximum potential. I think our greatest gift on this planet is to maximize our potential, to be as great as we possibly want to be, to have our light shine as bright as we want it to shine. And I think once we get over the fact that, we are great, we are all great in our own aspect, then you're not afraid to actually put it all on the line. And sometimes I would be out on the field and I would see a play and I would hit somebody maybe 60 pounds, heavier than me, and I would knock them out of the game. And I would look at myself and be like, how did I do that? Because I wasn't afraid to let go. And I had this mantra that it's going to be me or him, and it's not going to be me, and in that moment, magnificent things happened to where I couldn't even explain, so opening up those channels, I think, really helped me out.
So what was the difference in those kind of moments for you? Or maybe the question is, where did you draw on anger or love, right? Were those the energies you drew on in that moment? Football is such a beautifully violent sport, right? And a lot of times when we think of combative sports, we think only of the anger side of that combat, right? I mean, same in the martial arts when you're fighting, right? There's this natural tendency to gravitate towards that, but it's not the only energy that can fuel us.
Yeah.
So for you, where did that balance show up for you? As you're preparing to make a big hit, where was that energy coming from that was driving you?
I think it was coming from self-love, that I love myself enough not to be destroyed in this moment, and it could be, a very primitive, primal type of force where you're just trying to survive. It's fight or flight in some of those moments. And but I really called upon love. I didn't really play from a point of anger. I really wasn't angry with anybody. But I did kind of take this gladiator type of approach where, if we're in the ring, it's going to be a point where I want to make it out, and I want to perform. and I want to be the best that I can possibly be. And I don't want to leave anything out on the field. Like that would probably be one of my worst fears, is to, and I could use this for life or a football game where I get finished, and I look back and I say, I didn't leave it all out on the field, and I think, through that aspect of looking at, leaving it all out there and pushing yourself and maximizing your potential, it really helped me not only on the field, but, throughout the work that I do now. Being an entrepreneur, you have to have the same type of aspects and same type of approach, to life, that, hey, this solution is a challenge, but it needs to be solved. How am I going to solve this? What tools and what am I going to actually utilize to get that peak performance to solving this particular challenge?
And that's self-love, right? Yes. I mean, that by definition almost is what we channel and can call upon.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And a lot of people are afraid of self-love, but it's something that once you or they say, oh, you're not humble, or you're arrogant, but it's not an arrogance. Everybody should possess this love for themselves, because I think that is, when you love yourself, that is the only portal that will allow you to love somebody else. And you don't have the tools, you don't have the capacity or the energy to love someone else unless you love yourself. So, digging deep into that self-love, it just opens up so many gateways to brilliance.
Wow. Marques, this has been absolutely incredible. But before I ask my final question, where can these guys go to connect with you online?
Yeah, so you can go to marquesanderson.com. You could also go to my Instagram, which is Global Papa Smurf, POPPA Smurf, SMURF, Global Papa Smurf. Where I'm just, connected with different people. I'm really looking forward to 2019. I think this is a transitional year for me. I'm really excited, and it takes a global community of change workers. So if you have ideas, if you have certain problems or challenges that you may be experiencing, reach out, whether that's in an individual basis or all the way to a corporate or organizational basis, reach out.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. So this show is called Omni Athlete because we want to understand what it takes to be the ultimate mind, body, and spirit competitor. So the final question is, what does being an Omni Athlete mean to you?
Being an Omni Athlete to me is really about channeling your best potential, really about utilizing and not being afraid to maximize who you are in that moment and never afraid to become better. Becoming an Omni Athlete to me is connecting the mind, the body, and the spirit to perform. And I think through those things, we can start to open up a lot of different portals to becoming our greatest self, our truest self, and that reflects that self-love that we have.
Marques, thank you for being on the show. This has been just energizing. Guys, go dive so deep into Marques's world. If you don't know his work yet, get familiar with it. Watch his interviews, read the posts he's made, and just check out the work that he is doing. If you have ever wanted to understand how to balance the complexity of being an athlete and a human being at the highest possible levels of both, and wanting to understand what to do with the mind, body, spirit, what to do when you have connections and deeper meanings from just pieces of our experience that you don't necessarily have language for, Marques is living proof you can integrate. You can find a way to really balance and honor each piece, no matter how easy or hard it is. And if you dive into his world, you're going to see that right away. So please go check out the work that he's doing. And until next time, thank you for watching this episode of Omni Athlete. Hey, what is up, guys? Thank you for watching another episode of Omni Athlete. Please go like and subscribe to our podcast. That is our goal right now, is just to build this community as big as we possibly can, and we need your help to do it. So like and subscribe, share our content, guys. If this content adds any value to your world, that helps you perform, connect, go deeper, go wider, whatever it is that it does for you, if it provides value, all we ask is that you share our content and help grow this community. We can't accomplish our goal of elevating global consciousness through sport without you. You are an integral part of this mission and this purpose, and we need your help. So please go like, subscribe, and share our content, and continue to help us build and grow this community that is truly motivated to not just elevate consciousness, but elevate and shift the very culture of sport so that we can truly experience the athletic experience in a brand new and energizing way for so many people, guys. So thank you, and please like and subscribe. Until next time.